everyone, this is Wandering Tati. So I think it is time now that we go ahead to the website Philosophy Experiments and see what else they got for us. It's been a while since I made the first video, so I thought it would be fun to go check that out again. The experiments that we tackled last time were staying alive, you're being tortured in the morning, and finally, would you eat your cat? You can check all of those in the link I will leave you. We're not gonna go with something like should you kill the fat man, because that one is definitely the trolley problem, which we already discussed in another video. So let's see what else we have. Okay, in the spirit of the not so distant conspiracies about 5G and microchips, we are going to go with this one called Get That Chip Out of My Head. This interactive activity deals with issues broadly to do with free will and determinism, alternative possibilities and moral responsibility. It owes a lot to two essays in particular. The first is Harry Frankfurt's celebrated 1969 article from the Journal of Philosophy, Alternate Possibilities and Moral Responsibility. The second is an essay from John Martin Fisher and Mark Ravizza titled Morally Responsible People Without Freedom, which originally appeared as the final chapter of their 1998 book Responsibility and Control, A Theory of Moral Responsibility. Get that chip out of my brain. As in our wont, we're going to begin by asking you 2 or 3 preliminary questions so that we can get a sense of your moral outlook. After that, we will have a couple of scenarios for you to consider, and then we'll see where we're at. It's possible you've seen this first question before. A small girl is playing on a swing in a local playground, when an adult comes along and pushes her off into the dirt, making her cry for no other reason than that he'd had a bad day at work and wanted to take it out on somebody who wouldn't fight back. Oh yes, I remember this scenario. Are his actions morally wrong? Yes. Excellent. You seem like a decent sort of person. Well, thank you, Philosophy Experiments. I do try. Okay, the next question is a little tricky, so you need to take a bit of time thinking about it. It will be worth in the end. Possibly. If nobody is morally responsible for some fact X, and nobody is morally responsible for the fact that if X, then Y, does it follow that nobody is morally responsible for the fact that Y? Okay, probably that doesn't make much sense, so there's a concrete example to make things clearer. Suppose that there is some fact about the weather X that makes it inevitable that lightning will strike a barn, thereby causing a fire that will kill 3 people. Which is Y. The letter Y, not Y as in Y. If nobody is responsible for X, the weather, and nobody is responsible for the causal link between X and Y, that is, the link between lightning and the fire, does it follow that nobody is responsible for Y, the fire and the deaths? Note, you need to think about this in the abstract. We're interested in your judgment about the general principle, not about this particular case, which is illustrative only. Let me just consider this.
2,000 years later.
So okay, there is fact X which nobody is responsible for, and that one is something like the weather and it cannot be helped. That one is just something that happens. But then there is something that X will cause, which is the fire, and the fire will kill 3 people, which is Y. Okay, no one is morally responsible for that causal connection, but it could be the case that someone is morally responsible for Y. Even in the example that they give you here. The weather is something that nobody can control, so no one is morally responsible for what happens there. Nobody is morally responsible for the link between X and Y, which is the link between the lightning and the fire. It could be possible that someone is responsible for Y, which is the fire and people dying. Maybe the barn was set on fire because there were some safety hazards there. Perhaps whoever built the barn made it so that they would use cheaper materials, and so the barn would just catch on fire more easily than it should have otherwise. So I think it doesn't follow that nobody is responsible for the people dying in the barn. And so I think we cannot say that no one is responsible in general. I'm gonna go with no. We'll see what happens. Well, that's certainly an interesting response. Probably a little counterintuitive, but we'll have to see whether it plays out in your favor. I mean, I am sensing that it will. I feel like I'm cheating, but I know that this is just out to get me. We now have a sort of related question for you. Is it true that a person can only be morally responsible for what they have done if they could have done otherwise? Or, to put this another way, if an outcome is inevitable, if it was always the case that a person was going to do some X, there was simply no alternative, then is it true that they cannot be morally responsible for the outcome? Just in case it isn't quite clear what's being asked here, it's probably worth saying that philosophers have tended to think about this issue in terms of coercion, or an inner compulsion, or hypnotic suggestion, anything that makes it impossible for the individual to avoid doing whatever they end up doing. Listen, I know where this is sort of going. I think there are lots of things that determine the way we act. We don't choose when or where we are born, we don't choose our parents, we don't choose our experiences, we don't choose our genetics, we don't choose the brain that we have. So there's a lot of things that we cannot control, and it is possible that you can say that for all of us, it's the case that we could not have done otherwise if we were in a certain situation, that given our brains, our experiences, everything that happened before that moment, then that is the only way that we could have reacted. So I'm not okay with saying that because that may be the case, then we are not morally responsible for what we do. I mean, that way we would say that no one is morally responsible for anything. But I think that we still are, even though we cannot control it. I'm gonna go with no in this one. Maybe it sounds weird, but if I go with yes, I feel like I would be saying that a serial killer is not morally responsible for what they are doing because, I mean, yes, fine, it is a compulsion, it is a disease, if you will, it is something that maybe they cannot control, maybe they cannot control those impulses. But as a society, we still consider them morally responsible. We still say that they should go to jail, that they should pay for what they have done. So I think that in a sense, is implying that we consider them morally responsible. And I know that there are some cases in which the person may be declared insane, and maybe in that cases we would say that we don't consider them morally responsible. But we are still holding them responsible for what they have done, like they might go to a mental facility instead of going to jail. I think that we can make an argument that even though a psychiatrist might examine a serial killer and determine that they knew the difference between right and wrong and they still did what they did, we could somehow argue that they had a compulsion that they never chose to have, that they were maybe born like that everything that happened in their lives drove them to that place, but we're still going to hold them morally responsible for what they have done. And I agree that they should. I think we can feel some sort of compassion towards someone who has a horrible compulsion. But this is not the same as saying that I would ever allow for the things that they do to get a free pass. Of course not. Of course I think that a serial killer should go to jail. I can just maybe understand that there is something within them that they cannot control, and that is a tragedy for everyone involved, including themselves. Anyway, I just started ranting a lot, but let's go with this. That's a brave answer. It's probably fair to say that it goes against the majority view. In fact, the philosopher Harry Frankfurt has noted that the idea a person can only be morally responsible for what they have done if they could have done otherwise is sometimes taken to be a priori truth. But of course, not all philosophers agree, so it's still entirely possible you got this right. Okay, we now want to make a judgment about two scenarios. Scenario 1. Becky, the leader of Free All Fluffies, a radical animal rights group, has hatched a devious plan to kill 4 caribou hunters. It involves her detonating some explosives she's placed in the crevices of a glacier, with the intention of causing an avalanche that will crush the hunters. She goes ahead with her plan, detonating the charge at time 1, which does indeed cause an avalanche that crushes the hunters at time 3. However, what Becky didn't know is that the glacier is gradually eroding in a certain way, and had she not placed the dynamite in the crevices, some ice and rocks would have broken free at time 2, starting an avalanche that would have crushed the hunters at time 3. Is Becky morally responsible for the deaths of the hunters? The hunters would have died anyway, since the avalanche at time 3 was inevitable. But as it happens, Becky's triggering of the explosives at time 1 was the cause of the avalanche. I think yes, Becky is morally responsible for the deaths of the hunters. She was the cause of the avalanche that killed the hunters. If at time 2 the avalanche would have started anyway, I think is irrelevant. Becky caused at time 1 the action that would then cause the avalanche that would then kill the hunters. So I would say yes. Right, well, that seems to be the right answer. Certainly, it accords with the view of the philosophers John Martin Fisher and Mark Ravizza, who looked at this sort of scenario in their book Responsibility and Control, A Theory of Moral Responsibility. Scenario 2. It had come to the attention of evil genius Professor Sal Cohen. Oh, this guy again. I remember him. It has come to the attention of evil genius Professor Sal Cohen that there was a plan afoot to assassinate Bunny Amore, the leader of the radical animal rights group Free All Fluffies. Cohen has a strong dislike for anything four-legged, so he was very keen the plan should succeed. However, not wanting to risk losing tenure, he didn't want to become directly involved himself, so he proceeded as follows. First, he kidnapped the would-be assassin Boris Huntington and planted a microchip in his head by means of which he would be able to monitor and control Huntington's actions. Second, he wiped Huntington's memory of the kidnapping and surgery and placed him back in his normal environment, which allowed the plan to proceed as it would have done anyway. Third, he then used a sophisticated computer program to track Huntington's intentions. If Huntington had shown any sign of diverting from his plan, the professor would have activated the microchip in order to ensure that Huntington went ahead with the assassination. Fourth, as it happened, Huntington never did show any sign that he was having doubts about his plan, and the assassination went ahead without Cohen having to interfere. The following things are true about these events. A. The killing of Bunny Amore was morally wrong. B. Boris Huntington killed Amore entirely of his own volition. The microchip didn't fire, and its presence had no effect whatsoever on Huntington's behavior. C. There was never any doubt that Huntington was going to attempt to kill Amore, since had he wavered, Professor Cohen would have activated the microchip, thereby putting Huntington back on course for the assassination attempt. Though, as it happened, Huntington didn't waver, which meant there was never any need for Cohen to activate the chip. The question then is whether Boris Huntington is morally responsible for the act of killing Bunny Amore. I do not see any reason why we could say that Boris Huntington is not morally responsible for this. He is the one that decided to kill him in his own volition, as it says. The microchip was there, but it didn't really do anything. It was his own decision to kill Bunny Amore. Yes, I probably would have voted no if the microchip were activated. If Huntington decided to do otherwise in the last second and Cohen would have forced him to to do so, then I would say that Huntington was not morally responsible in that case. But since it was Boris Huntington who decided to kill and then went ahead and killed this guy Bunny, he is morally responsible for what he has done.
As morally responsible as any of us can be.
Let's see. Well, that's certainly in line with your previous response. It's also the answer given by Harry Frankfurt, who developed the first version of this sort of scenario, which are now called Frankfurt cases. There are 0 contradictions out of a possible 2 in your responses.
In your face, philosophy experiments.
It seems you are strongly inclined towards the view that free will and/or moral responsibility are compatible with determinism. I will have to think more about this, but it does seem that way. Becky and the Avalanche. We have the following statement A. If nobody is responsible for some fact X and nobody is responsible for the fact that X implies Y, then it follows that nobody is responsible for the fact that Y.
In our scenario, X would be the erosion of the glacier and Y the avalanche/deaths.
If we would have stated that A is true and that Becky is morally responsible at the same time, then we would have had a contradiction. Boris Huntington's chip. Here we have statement B, which is a person can be morally responsible even if they could not have done otherwise. If we would have said that B is false and at the same time that Huntington is responsible for killing Amore, then we would have had a contradiction. The scenario of Becky and the Avalanche is taken from John Martin Fisher and Mark Ravisat's book Responsibility and Control, A Theory of Moral Responsibility. It is designed to falsify what the authors call the principle of the transfer of non-responsibility,
or transfer NR for short,
which states that if nobody is responsible for some fact P and nobody is responsible for the fact that P implies Q, then it follows that nobody is responsible for Q. The scenario is designed to falsify transfer NR by showing that a person can be morally responsible for an outcome that is causally inevitable even if they are not responsible for the causal inevitability. The importance of this principle comes due to the fact that given the truth of causal determinism, it seems to undermine the idea that people are morally responsible for their actions. If the causal determinism is true, then there is some state of the universe P in the remote past which, together with the laws of nature, mean it is inevitable that you're going to do some A today, for example, kick your cat.
Why are we always hurting cats in these scenarios?
Clearly, you're not morally responsible for the state of the universe in the remote past, and it seems that you're not morally responsible for the fact that given this state in the remote past, then you're going to end up doing A today, because this connection is just a matter of causal laws. So it appears to follow you're not morally responsible for doing A today, kicking your cat. This sort of argument can be generalized to include all of your actions today, thereby undermining the idea of moral responsibility. The scenario of Boris Huntington's chip is a Frankfurt-style case based on a photo experiment by Harry Frankfurt. It is designed to challenge the idea that it is only right to hold somebody morally responsible if they could have done otherwise. In the scenario, Boris Huntington could not have made any other choice than the one he did make, to kill Amore, because if he had shown any sign of diverting from his course, Professor Coyne would have triggered the microchip. However, despite this fact, most people will likely think Huntington is morally responsible for killing Amore, since in fact the microchip was never needed. This seems to suggest it is possible to be morally responsible for a choice even if it's true that one could not have chosen otherwise.
How one views scenarios such as this has implications for where one stands on the compatibilism/incompatibilism issue with regards to free will and determinism.
Determinism asserts that every act is simply the effect of some prior cause, which itself will be the effect of a preceding cause, and so on. Incompatibilist philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant, define free will in such a way that it is logically incompatible with determinism. Put simply, if determinism is true, then there is no free will. Compatibilist philosophers, such as David Hume, take a different view. They define free will in such a way that it is logically compatible with determinism. In their view, a free action is one which flows from the intentions and desires of the acting agent. If an agent is not imprisoned, does not have a gun held to their head, is not suffering from a mental illness, and so on, then they can be said to be acting freely. So that's all for this second chapter on philosophy experiments. I really hope you found it interesting. If you did, please hit the like button to let me know. And please let me know your opinions in the comments.
What would you have answered in any of these cases?
Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Until next time!